If you are one of the relatively few people who decides that on this particular day your cure to boredom, or perhaps your cure to not being able to sleep, is to watch a Daihatsu review, then I'm actually going to go ahead and congratulate you. Because any who know me know that there's no way this is just a Daihatsu review. It has to be something different, something special. Well, wait for the next kicker, because not only am I talking about a Daihatsu, I bought it. This is my car. Why in the hell would somebody like me, who literally buys 7-8 litre Lincolns and Jag XKRs and Maserati Quattroportes left, right and centre, ever even consider being seen dead in a Daihatsu, let alone buy one, and I'll be honest with you, absolutely love it. Well, if you think that's crazy, I'm going to go a third level on you. In a few days' time, I'm going to be making my wrap-up to Beards and Cars for 2023, in which I will be crowning my Car of the Year. You know what I'm going to say next? This is my Car of the Year 2023. Why on earth is this car good enough? How on earth is this good enough for me to be gushing over it? Well, the story is obviously deeper. The Storia is deeper, if you will, because in Japan that is the name of this car. We know it as the Daihatsu Sirion. Shares a lot of tech, of course, with the Toyota Yaris. It is based on Toyota infrastructure, so certain things are known. It's going to be pretty cheap, very reliable, and probably pretty good on parts. Fuel, you would imagine, is probably going to be pretty good. It's very small. You can see that me, all 6'3" of me, just about fits in the car, and actually the headroom is pretty good, but it's not exactly a big car. You wear a Sirion more than sit in it, and in terms of performance, surely it can't be that good. I've already talked about stuff like the Fiat Panda 100 HP, that was almost my Car of the Year last year, but what if I told you that this little 2003 Daihatsu Sirion is not only 15% more powerful than the Fiat Panda 100 HP at 115 horsepower, but it's also about 100 kilos lighter. The Panda already only weighs about 950, this is more like the 850 kilo region. 850 kilos, 115 horsepower from a naturally aspirated 1.3 twin cam engine. A straight 4, of course front mounted and in Rally 2 form front wheel drive as well, with a 5-speed manual. A close ratio 5-speed, mind you. Ratios that are so close that on the motorway at 60 miles an hour, you'll be doing about 3,000 RPM, as I did driving this 4.5 hours home after driving it. But even then, I averaged about 52, 53 miles to the gallon, and of course every crosswind made me feel like I was going to do a barrel roll. With all of that being said, all of the jokes, all of the obvious things that you can say about how silly and horrific and borderline nursing home-esque this car is, it genuinely is that good. I even bought it over the Panda 100 HP, which I could have easily bought instead. So why on earth did I? Well, the things that I already mentioned are part of the reason. But what if I also told you that this little unassuming Daihatsu can actually do 0 to 60 in 7.8 seconds? Might not sound like that much when you compare it to Bentleys and Jags and Maseratis, but anyone who knows their small 100 to 120 horsepower hatchback market knows that's actually pretty damn quick. And even the top speed of around 115 miles an hour is quite good, although there's no way in hell I would ever take this car to that speed. But it really is when you start using this car on tighter roads, B roads, your everyday driver kind of stuff, that you really appreciate just how fun it is. And the fact that it is Japanese, the fact that it has that Toyota infrastructure not only makes it more reliable, it means that the parts don't cost that much. I even double checked some of the stuff like new wheel bearings, new tyres, new belts and chains. Nothing is expensive on this car. Now, I'm sure there are certain things that might be harder to find because it is the performance-oriented version, but even then, you compare it to the kind of stuff that I'm usually buying, it's not even close. This certainly wouldn't cost as much or be as difficult to find as something for a Cadillac Escalade, for example, or a Maserati Quattroporte. At the same time, it's a car which cost me £200 for the year to tax, the insurance is next to nothing, and the fuel economy is so good that I can make multiple trips and the gauge barely even moves. I'm literally getting 2-3 times the kind of economy even when I rag this thing as I get best of times out of the cars that I would typically buy. Now, the interesting thing about these particular rally versions of the Sirion, they're a little bit watered down and a little bit more classy, I guess you could say, compared to something like the Cross 4. The Cross 4, as I said, will set you back a whole lot of money. These ones are much more modest. In fact, the price that I paid of £1,900 is not unusual. The unusual thing is actually just finding one. For example, when I looked for mine, it was the only one on the market. I was watching it for a while, going back and forth on whether or not to get it, and I thought, you know what, I'm changing my cars, I need something as a quick little runabout, so it's the perfect time to buy one of my bucket list vehicles. It may not be a Cross 4, but it's pretty damn close. It has the spirit of that car, and has twice the engine size, as weird as that sounds in comparison for a 1.3. Now, it's actually a pretty torquey little car. You can pull away using just the clutch, which is quite impressive for a little machine, and even uphill, I can leave it in 5th gear and it will just fly up those hills, which of course is partially due to how close the ratios are. That itself, of course, has its downsides. The motorway, for example, is certainly not happy there, but it can be done. And in terms of the differences between this one and the Rally 4, as you would expect, it is a difference between two-wheel drive in the form of this one, which is the front-wheel drive model, and of course the Rally 4 has four-wheel drive. The problem is that the Rally 4 is still not a Cross 4, so it does technically add more traction, but it's actually slower because it's heavier. If you're actually going to go off-road, I'm sure it is an advantage, but for most of us, it's really not an advantage you would ever actually use. So the front-wheel drive version is, and I would say most other owners and fans would probably agree, the better one. That's not something which I would have expected to say. I would always go for a four-wheel drive version if I can, but on this occasion, having this much power, it's not really necessary. And of course, with the Cross 4 having a limited slip diff both on the front and the rear, makes a pretty huge difference there as well. Now, that's not to say that this car doesn't have its disadvantages. Two of the most common disadvantages tend to be one in terms of how it drives and two in terms of a common issue. The common issue probably won't surprise you too much, which is rust. They tend to have a bit of a rust issue, especially around the rear arches. This one already had that work done to get ahead of it. It could be something that comes up in future, and as I walk around the car, it does look a bit better in the video. I didn't even bother washing the car for this video, just to highlight my point of how completely under the radar this thing is, even in red. And as crazy as it sounds, this is a first for me in so many ways. This is only my second Japanese car I've ever had, second to the Evo, of course. It's my first manual car I've ever owned. It's, my 15th vehicle now, I think, and the first manual I've had, and yet it has genuinely made me fall in love with using a manual. And anyone who, again, knows me knows that's a big deal. I'll still choose an auto when I can have it, but there are certain cars that definitely don't need that and would not feel right with one, and this is one of them. The Panda 100 HP is another example. The other downside is one in terms of driving it. And this is a bit of a strange one, because it's not a downside you would expect. Stuff like the short ratio gears being an issue on the motorway, and maybe stability because it's so light, you'd expect those kind of things, but the brakes are actually a common thing. And when I first drove it, I found them to be a bit spongy. I thought maybe it's this particular car. I was talking to the chap who was selling it, who immediately regretted getting rid of it even as I was buying the car. It's a common thing apparently. The brake is pretty spongy. And it's spongy initially, in particular. So it has, and this is the only time you'll ever compare a Daihatsu to this car in the same sentence, but it actually suffers from the same issue that the Mercedes SLR McLaren has, which is that the brakes are very powerful, and they are working, they just don't feel like they're working. It lacks a bit of braking feel through the pedal. This one, although of course nowhere near as powerful as those carbon ceramics, has kind of a similar effect. So you start to press the brake, it does slow down, but you don't really get any feedback until you give it maybe a third of the brake pedal down. And then it comes to a stop just fine, but it does mean that if you really throw this thing through corners, in country roads for example, you might have a little bit of a hair-raising or white-knuckle moment if you forget that you do need to press a little bit harder, and perhaps a little bit earlier, on that brake pedal, that postage stamp-sized brake pedal, as you would with a normal car. Which, as I said, is kind of surprising. You would think with a performance or rally-oriented machine they might have accounted for that and made it a bit better. I'm sure there are upgrades you can do. I know people like to swap these out for braided brake lines. This particular one, it has a faded red rear wing. Of course, fading is very common on a red car. Again, crazily enough, this is my first ever red vehicle I've had. The roof is faded, it's covered in muck, and even the fake chrome on the door handles is of course bubbling up. Nothing about that actually bothers me though. And I don't think it bothers anyone else either, because again, it's a Daihatsu, so who really cares? That's kind of the point of it. On the interior side of things, there are one or two choices that Daihatsu made which are a bit odd, especially for something which is the more performance-oriented version. For one thing, it's got electric windows all round. That was a mistake, because electric windows are something which can break. The windows in this one are very sluggish, so I literally never use them. I think rollers would have been a far better idea, for two reasons. One, they're simpler, and of course, secondly, it's lighter. And why wouldn't you want to save weight in the performance version? Rollers just don't really break, typically, so I would have much preferred that. I'm sure some people have probably converted them, I doubt I'll bother, but again, that's kind of a weird choice. An even weirder choice is that it has stuff like electric mirrors. You can adjust the mirrors electrically and I believe even fold them in, which again is such an unnecessary thing to have on a car like this. It's almost like they took it from the L or, luxury trim, whatever they would call that, maybe the little 4-speed auto version of a Sirion, and just slapped it onto this. I'm sure that's exactly what they did, but again, it's totally pointless, and I don't think anyone really cares. It does, as it happens, have aircon as well, and it's even got a little footrest for when you are on a longer journey, although of course you'll want to be careful with that footrest because it's about the same size as the clutch pedal. So with feet like mine, you'll need to get your foot out of the way, which is why you can see my knee is basically under my chin. I'm not going to say it's the most comfortable thing over long journeys, but as insane as this sounds, as somebody who at this moment literally has this car parked next to a 3-ton, 224-inch Cadillac Escalade on my driveway, I will say that this actually has genuinely more headroom than the Cadillac. I know that sounds unbelievable, but the reason why is because in this car, it's not that wide, it's not that long, but of course K-car style, it's fairly tall in terms of headroom. So I can literally sit completely upright with my back in the best possible position and still have headroom. Whereas in the Cadillac, I cannot do that. In the Escalade, I can sit comfortably enough, but the fact that it has the sunroof, of course, sacrifices a lot of that space because you've got to have the electronics and the motor above you, which makes the roof liner thicker, and of course the seat itself has tech underneath, which means it can't go down quite as far. So it's kind of crazy how much use of space this car has. Of course it does have a downside in terms of just how thin the body is, so it's only got a 3 out of 5 on crash safety. Let's be honest, who would have expected this to ever be good in a crash? It's not why you buy a car like this. But none of that really matters to me, because it's a tiny, cheap runabout that no one pays any attention to. And even with my admittedly frequent road rage that I have with slow people, it must look quite hilarious. And sure, when you have road rage behind someone in a black 3-ton, 224-inch long, 6'3" high, blacked out Cadillac Escalade, where it looks like the CIA have paid a visit to England for some random reason. In this car, on the other hand, it probably looks like something more akin to being chased by an angry tomato. And the thing is, it doesn't need to attract attention. It doesn't need to be popular. It doesn't need people to love it. This is 100% the kind of car that you either get or you don't. Everyone who loves a fast little hatchback will love driving this thing. There is no way that you can drive it and not enjoy it. It's just that much fun. Plus you're getting superb fuel economy, Japanese reliability, and because it's so rare, mine is legitimately, I believe, one of only 17 of these in the UK, so it's a proper little unicorn, and it means that when you do put it up for sale, you will actually get way more interest than you'd think. So not only is it a fantastic little daily driver that you could have sitting around for 6 months and still enjoy it when you turn it on again, might just need a new battery, but it is simultaneously one of the most fun, one of the craziest, one of the wackiest little sleeper cars around. For some, it still won't necessarily make sense why this would be my car of the year, but in my opinion, a vehicle that offers all of this for less than $2,000 consistently on the used market for something as quick as this, something as understated, something as practical on fuel and running costs, something as reliable, as simple, and in a world of ever more complicated vehicles, something which keeps things so unbelievably simple for the most part, well, how could you not love it? The only thing that there's not to love is just the image that Daihatsu has, and even that works to its favour as a sleeper car. But of course, I would love to hear the thoughts of those who have owned a Rally 2, maybe the Rally 4, I would be curious to hear about that one, and of course, if you've ever driven or owned a Daihatsu Storia, which of course is the other name for it, Cross 4, I would love to hear stories about that one. So of course, let me know down below. This is not the only Daihatsu I would love to get my hands on. I'd actually really love to drive the also Japanese market Daihatsu Move SRXX. I'd love to review a Daihatsu Core SRXX or TRXX, I don't recall the name on that one. I actually have really a soft spot for these crazy little Daihatsus. They're so undervalued, which of course makes them an absolute bargain. But that's it for my thoughts, of course. Check out the Beards and Cars review series for more, and of course stick around in a few days for my Car of the Year video, as well as the 9 other Cars of the Year as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.